Good afternoon. I'm Mark Frezzolone. Hello, everyone. From Bethlehem Presbyterian Church. Excited to be with you today for a concert. We actually have a fellow who arranged a concert a few years back with music of one of the composers for today, Fanny Mendelssohn, and ended up essentially sparking this this concert. I was on my computer finding out someone arranged a four-hands version of music that this composer, Fanny Mendelssohn, the brother of Felix Mendelssohn, had composed. And within 15 minutes, I got a call from our friend Charlie Asbury. We know Charlie used to be in our choir and come here, that he knows a couple who plays four-handed music. And they're beginning to go on tour locally, you know. And 15 minutes is quite a coincidence, and that's where the origin of this concert came from. The team is Mada and Hugh. Mada, Claudia Daniela, is an internationally known pianist. You can read about both Mada and Hugh on the back. It would be a shame if I tried to correctly articulate the competitions in Charleston and London, which they come in #1 together. They performed independently with orchestras in Baltimore and Philadelphia. Hugh served on the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia Board of Student Recitals, and I'll tell you, the accomplishments are amazing, but the music is really what is special. So enough of me. We are thrilled today to introduce, with little Zeus, who will just be accompanying for fun and comfort, Mada and Hugh.
Good afternoon. Hope you don't mind. I'm going to get a sling for you. So ever since we got Zeus, we picked him up as a puppy in Arizona. And very shortly after picking him up, I just had this wonderful idea of having him in a sling. And this is like his safe zone. He just feels right at home over here. We go shopping, we do our chores, I carry things. He's just
People think he's a bat because he doesn't move too much in there.
All right. Well, good afternoon. It's so wonderful to be here in this. I guess this is an inaugural concert experiment. So, anyway, I'm Hugh Sung.
And I'm Mada, and we want to give a lecture for about
I'm sorry.
Right, thank you.
Very nice. Can you hear us now?
Yes, that's great.
Paging Dr. Davis. Paging Dr. Davis.
Yeah. So today, before we play one single note, we would like to talk a little bit about the composers that we are going to present. It's something particular and peculiar about this repertoire today. It's all female composers. Now, for us, I don't think we have ever done this in our four-hand concerts. So it's a premiere for us as well. So I grew up in Romania, and as you know, tradition in all music conservatories goes, I played mostly repertoire by male composers. I would say 99.9%. And you know, the more I grew older, I started to wonder myself, well, isn't it a little bit more out there? And particularly coming to the US about 7 years ago, I started discovering a lot of other female composers, whose works are just as valuable as any other male composer. And I'm going to give a spoiler alert here. One of the composers that is going to be featured today is Fanny Mendelssohn, the sister of Felix Mendelssohn. And there are lots of cases like this across the music history. For example, Mozart and his sister Nanelle, same thing. He was the child prodigy of the family. But she wasn't less. But because she was, a female in society back then, she had to stick a little bit under, so, had other duties imposed on her by society. Or, for example, Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert Schumann, pretty much in the same pot. But, okay, Hugh, would you like to say something?
Sure. One thing, just maybe hold the microphone a little bit lower. So, yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the atmosphere of the 19th century. It was not kind to female composers, female performers. Everything, it was very, very much male-dominated. And for a woman to be interested in music was fine as a hobby, fine to be an amateur. But to make a living or to be a professional, it was unheard of. It was a cultural norm of that time. I think the remarkable thing is, given that cultural stifling, that the genius of the women that we're going to present is even more remarkable, because they weren't encouraged with their talents, except for perhaps Cécile Chaminade. But for the most part, they weren't encouraged, they weren't endorsed. They were largely ignored, and there were comments from other famous composers, male composers, who would look upon the works of some of these female composers and say things like, remarkable for a woman. I mean, you could still, it was a very demeaning attitude. And for genius to flourish in that kind of a stifling atmosphere with no real soil for growth, I think speaks to a couple of things. Number one, that these women made music and created art for the sake of art, for the sake of expression, for the sake of bringing something of themselves into the world, even if nobody would hear a single note. So, just imagine yourself in a career where you're never encouraged, where you're actually actively discouraged. If you wanted to train in the world's best conservatory, the French Conservatoire, the Paris Conservatoire at that time, they didn't accept women. You couldn't study. You couldn't improve your art. How remarkable. I mean, imagine yourself any career if you had that kind of discouragement. Would you want to go on? Would you want to study? Or just give up and do something else, right? So this is the backdrop of the women that we're going to be talking and performing for you this afternoon. So let's kind of move on to our first female composer.
Yeah, so the first female composer featured today is called Melanie Boni. Well, we all know her today by the name Mel Boni. She was born around 1858, and she clearly showed sign of exceptional musical talent. And she, I would say reluctantly, she was accepted into the Paris Conservatoire, the music conservatory, where she was classmates with Paul Dukas, who composed the Sorcerer's Apprentice, very famous piece, or Claude Debussy. She was extremely talented, but she was a woman. So the fact that after she graduated, she moved on with her life, meaning that she married, she had children, and she managed the household before she actively pursued composition in her, I would say, midlife. Her husband did not encourage her, so she pretty much worked in the shadows, I would say. But she was very active, and she composed over, I would say, 300 works for different genres. For example, piano music, solo and for hands, chamber music, orchestral works, or choral works. And the fact that she gave herself permission to adopt a new name, her stage name, her artist name, Mel Boni, I think for me sounds like a statement. She knew who she was, she knew who she wanted to be, first of all. And despite the society that surrounded her, she did do what she wanted to do. She did, I would say, follow her call, her inner call. And the three pieces we're going to play today, the Valse Lente, Interlude Bacchanal, and Danse Sacrée, these pieces show great versatility in terms of what she wanted, what she had to say. For example, the Valse Lente has this languid elegance. The Interlude Bacchanal is full of theatrical energy. And then the Danse Sacrée has this processional weight. And this, to us, this shows that this is not drawing room music. This is not salon music. It speaks much more. It speaks beyond the norms of society where Melbourne lived.
So from an example of a woman whose music was largely ignored for most of her own life, we're going to jump to another French female composer, Cécile Chaminade. She was born in Paris in 1857, and contrary to Melbourne, she was not allowed to study at the Paris Conservatory, and she instead just hired private tutors and did it on her own. Her father helped her get at least some tutorage. What was remarkable is that Cécile Chaminade actually enjoyed this incredible level of success. She started touring extensively and famously here in the United States several times. She toured so much, and her music actually was very popular. So popular that all across the United States, you had what we called Chaminade clubs. These were gatherings of women who were fans of her music, and they would get together in different cities all around the country and play her music. In fact, I think one historian at one point said that every single household with a piano had at least one piece of Chaminades in their collection. She was that popular. In fact, just a few years ago, we played at one of the last remaining existing Chaminade clubs up in Yonkers, New York. Pretty remarkable that they're still doing it, still promoting her music. What was interesting was that this success became a double-edged sword, where her music first enjoyed this incredible popularity, and then it suddenly became panned. People, male critics, would say, "Oh, it's just too pretty. It's very superficial. It's not something worth delving into." And so her popularity just as quickly plummeted. And what's really tragic is the fact that her music, many times people would look at these female composers and think of them as lesser works, lesser intellectual pursuits. When you really, and we've actually championed both Melbourne's and Chaminade's music very early on in our collaborations, because we found that this music was absolutely wonderfully crafted. If anything, Chaminade has this incredible imagination, this way of almost painting pictures out of sound, and it's just genius. When we play the three works that we're going to play for you, La Chaise à Porteur, you're going to hear the little the carriages, the people, the gentlemen who carry the little, what do you call it? The
old-fashioned.
The old-fashioned, the word is escaping me. Royalty, yeah? I'm sorry? Like a rickshaw. No, not a rickshaw. These will be two poles in the back, two poles in the front. The royalty would ride in the cabin. Between those poles, you'd have two sets of men. And
Remember that scene in Cleopatra, right? When she appears and there are a lot of people carrying the opulent carriage. Well, pretty much like that. Yeah.
so you're going to hear...
This is a much lighter carriage. Not like
So you're going to hear the footsteps of these carriers bringing their very important guest inside the carriage. And then we're going to also play two interesting cultural interpretations. One is called Idylle Arabe, an Arabian fantasy, so a bit of Arabian music as interpreted by a French cultural eyes. And then we have a Hindu dance, danse en deux. And again, Hindu mysticism. And you hear the contrast in these wonderful scenes that are very, very short, but it's like she just paints these amazing colors in miniature. I would say her craftsmanship is, if anything, has this clarity of vision and scene and colors, and we know you're going to enjoy that.
Yeah, so around that time in Paris, there was this cultural movement called Impressionism, or in literature, it's symbolism, right? And at the end of the 19th century, the Oriental exhibition took place. So a lot of artists, not just composers, painters, sculptors, took a lot of influences from there. There were Oriental instruments, Japanese, Chinese instruments presented. So artists started to be more aware of what was going on abroad. So they started to use the influence in their music and their craft. Another female composer for today is Florence Price, American composer. She was the first black woman to have a symphony performed by a major American orchestra, I think the Chicago one, 1933. And the work that we're going to play, the Choreopsis, was originally composed for solo piano and then was arranged for 4 hands. And it paints a landscape, that's how we see it, in pastel colors. And it's like a very fluid landscape. And it shows a lot of imagination, right? A lot of nuances and a lot of textures in there. And apparently the manuscript of this piece was discovered quite recently in 2009. But all of it. All of her music was discovered fairly recently, and it has become quite popular ever since.
It was an accidental discovery of all of her music in an attic. So amazing that they just found her music. So she's now enjoying some much-deserved posthumous popularity. The 2 other composers we're going to be performing have collaborated to work on a piece called Table d'Hôte, which is like a dinner menu. V. Longhurst and Muriel Pollack. They were a duo known as the Ladybugs in the golden era of radio. And they just wonderful delights, and it's kind of a little bit of a diversion of our program, a little bit of jazz and Tin Pan Alley in styling, so we're going to help you enjoy all of those little tidbits there. And now we're going to move into the kind of the star of the show, Fanny Mendelssohn. Now, Fanny Mendelssohn was born 4 years before her famous brother, Felix Mendelssohn. So whenever people say Mendelssohn, they're usually referring to Felix. Yeah? And similar to Mel Boney, her father and even her brother actively discouraged her from pursuing a career in music, even though, by all accounts, the two were equally talented on the piano and equally talented in composition. Now, the real tragedy is the fact that Fanny Mendelssohn's music has only come to light since 2000, the year 2000. So what is it? How many years has it been? It's been over 100-some years, 130-some years, that nobody heard her music at all. And so what we're going to be performing is selections from probably her greatest work, Das Jahr, or The Year. She wrote Das Jahr while vacationing in Italy with her husband, who was actually, William Hensel was a wonderful illustrator. And she spent a year, I think she spent a year in Italy. Wouldn't it be nice to spend a year someplace on vacation? One of these days we'll do that. Anyway, so she wrote these months, each month of the year, as her reflections in terms of what she experienced on holiday. And I have to say, the whole piece, if you play all 12, plus there's a postlude, there's actually 13 works in this massive collection. If you were to play the whole thing, it would take about an hour. So we decided that we would select the most important months to us. So we selected the month of November because that is the month that Fanny Mendelssohn was born. September is my month. October is Zeus's month, our little puppy, baby puppy. And then something remarkable, as we were studying the music, we saw that April and May were connected. In other words, there's a word in Italian, when in music we say attacca. When you get to the end of one piece, attacca means go right to the next piece without stopping. And it just so happens April is Mada's birth month, and May is Fanny Mendelssohn's death month. So an interesting connection there. Our program, and I think I like the way this juxtaposition works, because November, you'll hear, is very dark and stormy and very dramatic. You know? It's almost as if Fanny Mendelssohn knew us 130-some years ago and wrote this for us, because Zeus's October month sounds very royal. By the way, he is a coton de Tuileurs. The coton de Tuileurs were the royal dogs of Madagascar. For many years, only royalty could own this dog. So we're very lucky to have this royal dog. And I think October sounds appropriately written for Zeus. September is, wishy-washy and dark, just like me. April is, how would you describe April?
Fickle. I mean, it is fickle, right? I mean, yeah. And May, of course, it's the death of Fanny Mendelssohn. Fanny Hansel, actually, because scholars refer to her as Fanny Hansel, her husband's name, in order to differentiate her from her brother, right? And a little bit about this cycle, das Jahr, or the year. Her husband, which I find a very interesting connection, the fact that her husband was a painter. And he encouraged her to write. She wrote this cycle when she was crossing a, how would I say, transformative period of her life. She was encouraged by her husband to compose, and undoubtedly spending time in Rome and in Italy, clearly that was a big influence on her and big inspiration. And I think she captured the essence of each month quite in a very coloristic manner in her music. Not to mention that she was a fabulous pianist, and we could tell from, you know, the difficulty that this music poses. And there's one thing very important. So both her and her brother, Felix, they were raised in an exceptionally educated Jewish family. They had the same level of education, the same resources, cultural resources growing up. Apparently there is a letter from her father to her, to Fanny, saying that, well, yes, they're considered both prodigies, both equally talented, but Felix has already a career, a musician career ahead of him, because, you know, this is going to be his calling. It's okay for her to only do this as an ornament, as a hobby. And yes, you might think, well, their dad was kind of a villain. No, he was not. He was just reflecting the norms, the assumptions of society at that time on his children. And I mentioned this example earlier, Clara Wieck, actually, before marrying Schumann. Clara Wieck was a prodigious female pianist. Her father pushed her almost to a limit as a kid to perform, to tour, almost what Mozart's father did with him, with Mozart. Just touring everywhere, showing off the talent and hoping to have a career like this as a soloist. And Clara did until she met Schumann. And there's quite one of the most romantical love stories, I would say, in music history that we know of. Anyway, but going back to Fanny Mendelssohn, I think she was really lucky to have a husband to encourage her, to support her, and to allow her, to offer her the chance that she didn't have growing up.
So what was interesting is that William Hensel, that Madalena is referring to, was a painter, and the manuscript was actually never published in Fanny Mendelssohn's lifetime. However, he would have little paintings and illustrations throughout the book. So it was a wonderful, beautiful, handcrafted manuscript that stayed in the family. And it wasn't until, eventually that manuscript, along with the other family works, collections, eventually ended up in a vast collection in a library in Krakow. And it didn't come in Poland, and it didn't come to scholarly attention until the 1980s or 1990s, actually. So again, the first edition, I think, was published in 2000. That's how recent this piece is. And one thing to really clearly delineate, Das Jahr was written for solo piano. All right? Fiendishly difficult work for one pianist. And again, thanks to Mark's wonderful connection with Hensel Publishers, we were able to get a copy of this wonderful four-hand version written and arranged by a wonderful pianist named Molly McCann, who started Hensel Pushers, I think the name of the company, Hensel Pushers, during the pandemic. Amateur pianist who discovered Fanny Mendelssohn's work and committed to playing each of her months in the given month during the pandemic. And I think we were having this wonderful conversation. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. We had this Zoom interview that Mark hosted, and she was sharing the story of how she discovered, she read this wonderful biography of Fanny Mendelssohn that had recently come out, contacted the authors because she said, I can't find any of Fanny's music. And apparently, I believe one of the libraries in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken, has all of Fanny's works scanned and available for free, just to view the original scans of her handwritten manuscripts, or they're handwritten. And so Molly took it upon herself to transcribe and put all of those to print, which is remarkable. So hats off to Molly. Thank you for your love and dedication to getting Fanny's music out there. And Molly was telling us that to help get her music out there, that's why she wrote both a four-hand version of this to get this out into the hands of more people, as well as a simplified piano version for students. And you can all find this on her website. I think it's henselpushers.com. Is that correct? I'm getting the thumbs up. So Molly, I hope I got that right too. So again, remarkable how all these elements come together. 159 years that this music has never been heard. And apparently this four-hand version that you're going to hear tonight, we may have a small crowd, but you are the privileged few to hear the world premiere of this four-hand version of Das Jahr, 159 years after it was originally written. So anyway, pretty remarkable.
After she completed this cycle, Fanny gifted the score for Christmas to her husband. So we are gifting you the world premiere of this four-hand arrangement.
So we hope you enjoy this program that we put together for you. We're going to put Zeus in his little pad over there, and we'll take it from here. Sorry for the extra noise.
Thank you.